Hi everyone, welcome. This is National Master Dennis Monokroussos, and today we're going to kind of switch gears after our three-part series on my game with Tate. And I think what I want to do today is express something of my chess credo, really. Something about what I really love about the game, and I think how to pursue it, really, for many of you, to at least consider taking this kind of approach to the game. A lot of us are big fans of opening theory, and while there's certainly nothing wrong with studying openings, I think that there's something kind of fundamentally misguided about most of us as amateurs, and I would certainly count myself in that realm, even though I still have some ambitions. I mean, ultimately, we're playing the game for fun, really. And as such, while okay, I mean, it's not bad to prepare openings deeply. It's something a little strange about us trying to follow the fashions of super grandmasters and trying to master some super complicated version or variation of the Knight Order for the Sveshnikov or the Semislav 30 moves deep. What we really ought to be doing, or at least spending a good deal of our time doing, is exploring and trying to kind of learn the game from the bottom up. And that involves studying endgames and practicing our tactics and all that good stuff, and we all do that. But we could even take this kind of experimental, hands-on, fun approach to the opening too. And so I want to show some interesting and I think amusing opening ideas, primarily in the Italian game, that I've kind of goofed around with and explored over the years. It's not that I play these necessarily, but they've been really interesting ideas, and as I said, it's just a lot of fun to play this. And some of these dubious ideas I've played as well. So you've seen me in past shows play relatively serious openings, like the Berlin, which is a pretty stodgy positional approach. Well, I don't know if it's stodgy, but it's certainly a positional approach. On the other hand, you saw me sacrifice my queen on move 6. So I've been all over the spectrum. In any case, this will show some of my entertaining and dubious ideas. But again, it just shows how rich the game is for exploration. And we don't have to, again, follow the main lines 30 moves deep to have fun at the game. All right, so let me show you some goofy ideas here. Okay, so e4, e5, right, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4. So we'll stick to the main line here. Now, if you're like me, you probably grew up playing the Italian game before you ever learned to play the Ruy Lopez or anything else, and there's a lot of fun things. So well, okay, actually, I'm trying to think what order I want to go with this at. Actually, I'll show one kind of funny thing. So there's a famous beginner trap that many of you will have learned that goes like this. So black plays knight to d4, white takes on e5, queen g5, and now knight takes f7. So this looks like the big punishment for black's goofy play here. So first white wins a pawn, then he wins a second pawn, and he has this fork as well. But this is really bad. Black plays queen takes g2, threatening all kinds of mayhem. Rook f1, queen e4, bishop b2, knight f3 mate. Now probably all of you learned this at some point, or at least many of you learned this at some point. You realize that this is something to be avoided for white, and maybe you tried it with black a couple of times too in your chess adolescence or infancy, and then gave it up and just forgot all about it. But just to kind of show this, not as something that you should take up to play, but that it's actually a very interesting position just for the fun of analyzing. All right, so here, instead of knight takes e5, white could play bishop takes f7 check. So this certainly has its amusement potential. King takes f7, knight e5 check, and now it's just a lot of fun, and maybe more fun for white than for black. Now, is white winning here? No, but it's he certainly has reasonable compensation, and the game is going to go off in its own amusing directions. And this is, I would say, a position worth analyzing. So what exactly is going on here? What should black do? Should he play the king to e8 and allow queen h5 check? Of course, allowing that, what's going on here? So let's say this, g6, knight takes. Okay, well, maybe black can take on c2. who knows what exactly is happening here? All right, maybe he should take the knight first, and if queen takes pawn, king e7. It's not clear what white has now, but maybe he plays d3, threatening bishop to g5 check. So you can see that the complications will just mount up very, very rapidly. Another possibility is maybe knight c3, again threatening knight to d5, which is mate. So this is, I would say, just tons of fun. Even if it's never going to come up in your games, why not explore it? All right, so let me show something else here too. You can even fall for the trap with knight takes e5. Okay, black plays queen to g5. And now, instead of taking on f7 with the knight, you can take with the bishop. Okay, black plays king e7. And now you castle. And as we look at this, okay, black gets the knight, but his king is stuck on e7. This is not the most natural square for the king you'll ever see. And white's going to gain some tempi here with c3 and d4, kicking black's pieces back. He's going to have a very nice big pawn center. He's got 2 pawns for the piece already, and it's quite interesting. Now here, white can continue with bishop takes g8, rook takes g8, c3, and now depending on where the knight goes, white pushes the appropriate pawn. So if knight to e6, maybe the best move is f4. All right, the point is that if queen takes e4, white plays f5, and the knight can't move because of rook e1, pinning and winning. All right, if black plays knight c6 instead, well then white plays d4. Again, white doesn't have to worry about losing the e-pawn because of the pin. And meanwhile, again, we've got this big pawn center. They can keep rumbling here. You can play f4 and d5 and e5. Of course, develop some pieces too. That's always a useful thing to do. And again, white is just whipping up a really dangerous attack. And in fact, I'd say he's probably even clearly better in this position. So I would say exploring positions like this is just an awful lot of fun, and you can learn a tremendous amount. Okay, going back to bishop to c4, of course there are other alternatives that can be played in the double e-pawn openings, in the Italian game in particular. Alright, so let's look at the 2 knights. And here I have a funny little story. So I was teaching some kids at a camp to play the 2 knights. And 2 of the variations that I mentioned here were this. So first of all, if knight c3, then knight takes e4, so-called fork trick, is completely fine for black. White should play knight takes e4, d5, and here bishop to d3 is the best move. Bishop to b5 is bad, because d takes e4, knight takes e5, and now I'm trying to remember if it's queen to d5 or queen to g5. Probably queen to g5. Okay, so if knight takes c6, maybe there's queen takes g2. There's also queen takes b5. Queen takes b5 is certainly safe. Nothing wrong with this. And black is a little bit better here. He's got the bishop pair. He's got the good pawn on e4. Absolutely nothing to worry about here. So bishop to b5 is no good. Bishop to d3, this is just boring equality at best for white. After d takes e4, bishop takes e4, bishop to d6. I remember one game I had was kind of funny with an expert. I think we were playing a rated match. He played d3 here, which is dubious at best. And after knight to e7, he was in some trouble because I'm threatening simply f5, trapping the bishop. Okay, so that's one bad way for white to play after knight takes e4. Even worse is bishop takes f7, which is just an outright mistake. After king f7, knight e4, d5, black is clearly better. So the king is slightly misplaced for a moment, but only slightly. And he's got the bishop pair, he's got the big pawn center, and as I said, black is just clearly better in this position. Okay, so anyway, knight c3, knight takes e4 was one line that I taught them. The second thing I taught them was to play the Wilkes-Barre variations. After knight to g5, to play the move bishop to c5. And the best move here for white, well, it's hard to say. There was a long series of New in Chess where the author claimed that knight takes f7 wins for white. Now, this has been known for a long time. Knight takes f7, black plays bishop takes f2 check, and white chooses between king takes f2. Whoops, sorry about that. King takes Oops, where am I? No. Yeah, that's it. Okay, sorry. King takes f2, knight takes e4 check, and also king f1, and queen e7, and so on. All right, so very complicated. The new in chess articles have all been challenged, and black is probably still kicking in this variation, but it's very, very complicated. White has to be familiar with it and know a great deal to not get in a huge amount of trouble here. A safer way for white to play, but also not winning, is bishop takes f7 check, king e7, and then either bishop to b3. This is the less popular move historically, or bishop to d5. And black, okay, he's just down a pawn. He'll play d6 and queen e8, queen g6, rook goes to f8. And you can see his development is very nice, very natural, very speedy, and he has good compensation for the pawn. To show, I think, the fundamental soundness of this variation anyway for black, Bilyavsky played this against Karpov in the 80s when Karpov was at his peak and drew the game. So, maybe at some point white will find some way to hold the pawn in a relatively safe way and be able to try to grind out a win. But it's not at all easy. And again, what the best computers in the world and maybe the best players in the world can do isn't especially relevant to you and I. So it's not that we shouldn't learn from them and try to emulate them in certain respects, but we don't have to worry about everything that they can do when it comes to our own play. All right, so the Wilkes-Barre is certainly a very fun variation, and whether it's completely sound or not, it's certainly good enough for that level, but probably for my level as well, and even up. So anyway, that's what I taught them. Now, so it was knight c3, knight takes e4, and if knight to g5, bishop to c5. Well, one of my students, I don't remember her last name, but her first name was Eliana, decided to play, she got these mixed up and played knight takes e4. Now, I could have, said, oh, no, that's wrong, you got this all messed up. And I did say, well, I think you're confusing these two lines, but I realized, well, maybe this is interesting. Let's try to go with this. So it was played a couple of times in the databases before this, but I've tried to make a little system out of this, and dubbed it the Eliana Gambit after the student who accidentally came up with this. And it's actually quite interesting. So again, this I think gives an idea of the richness of chess and of just what we can do in openings here. Okay, so first of all, if white takes the knight, we've got an even better version of the fork trick here with d5, because white's knights end up being worse in this version of it. So bishop to d3 again, d takes e4, bishop takes e4. In the other case, white already had a knight on f3, so here white is just undeveloped. So here I think black is actually slightly better. Okay, so that's the first option for white. It's not very good. Okay, the second line is knight takes f7. And here, black is actually doing pretty well with queen to h4. And, of course, we're threatening mate. And if, for example, queen f3, black plays knight to d4, and you can see his pieces are getting really frisky pretty quickly. This is not going to be an awful lot of fun for white. Okay, well, how about we simply castle? Well, here, black can play knight takes f2. Spectacular little move here. We got a rook en prie, so what do? Put a knight en prie also. Okay, if white moves the queen, bishop to c5 is plenty good. So we might as well play rook takes f2. Okay, now bishop to c5. And here, just to give a sample line, knight takes h8, bishop f2. And whatever white does, black is in very good shape. Probably the best move here, well, the best move is king f1, because if he plays king to h1, then simply queen takes c4, and black is fine. He's actually up a pawn here, and perhaps he's going to trap the knight with queen to g8 as well. So I think black is just winning in this position. So the best move is king to f1, of course. So that way, if queen takes c4, king takes f2. But black plays bishop to b6, and he's threatening mate on f2. He's threatening the bishop on c4, and he's clearly better in this position. So we can see that the obvious knight takes f7 is no great shakes either for white. So the best move is bishop takes f7 check, king e7. Okay, and now if knight takes e4, king f7, queen f3, this is a better version than the original knight takes e4 line. But even so, black is okay here. Now he has to play king to e6. But white really can't exploit this. So for example, queen g4, king e7, knight b to c3, d6. You can just let him check on d5. It's no big deal. And black is okay. White's a little bit better, but it's really nothing too serious. And if white can't find anything all that exciting fairly quickly, black is going to be in good shape because, again, he's got good pawn center and he's got the bishop here. So the long-term advantages are black's. Okay, so this is playable. All right, a more serious line, instead of knight takes e4, is d3. All right, now this is really the acid test. Now, of course, black can't take on g5 because bishop takes g5 and goodbye queen. But what he can do instead is to just play knight back to f6, just a calm move. And after bishop to b3, black is threatening h6, so white has to untangle here. Bishop to b3, d5, and sure, white is in decent shape if he plays very actively and very accurately, and I won't spoil the fun for you. I'll let you try to figure it out on your own. But black's idea is quite straightforward. It's kind of like the Wilkes Barre. He's going to play queen e8, queen g6, maybe bring this bishop out, king d7, and you can see all of his pieces are going to come out to great squares. White has to play very accurately and actively to thwart black's very simple and straightforward plan of attack. All right, so what we see here is that even with a seemingly completely crazy move, like meaning knight to g5 with knight takes e4, you can get a very, very interesting and almost completely unexplored position. So the advantages of looking at things like this over, let's say, studying 30 moves of Sveshnikov's Sicilian theory are that, first of all, obviously there's the element of surprise. Secondly, you can get a reasonable position. Now, some of these lines are shakier than others, but and I'm not saying that you should make a lifestyle out of playing bad openings just for the sake of surprise. But the other thing that's really important about this is that you learn a lot about chess, and you learn how to analyze, because these positions become tactical instantly. And so, since tactics are really the fundamental skill of the chess player, I mean, if you can't calculate, it doesn't matter how much theory you memorize, you're going to have to eventually figure out something on your own, and if you're not ready, then bad things will happen. So this is great for your practice in tactics, for your practice in analysis, in addition to saving you hours and hours of boring memorization work. Now, again, studying theory doesn't have to be that, but again, you just bypass a whole bunch of this. So I'd say when you start getting 1900, 2000, you can start worrying about some theory, but before that, you can have a pretty much wash and wear kind of repertoire, as I call it. So you know a little bit, and you're ready to go. So you don't have to keep up with whatever the latest thing is in New in Chess or chesspublishing.com or whatever. All right, so you can just play. Okay, so that's a second little fun weapon there for you. But again, this is just just trying to illustrate things. The way to take this lecture isn't, I've got some new opening ideas, and now I'm going to study these into the ground and take that as my new little source of theory. No. The point is to take this as kind of an inspiration, at least I hope so, and come up with your own crazy ideas. All right, so here's another one. Okay, and this one is actually known, bishop to e7. And there's a well-known trap here that white has sometimes played and won with very quickly. So d4, and here theory says, okay, play d6, and white has a very slight advantage. The usual procedure is d takes e5, d takes e5, and now queen takes d8. It's okay, it's not that special. I think bishop to d5 is usually given as the move to get a minimal advantage for white. But instead of that, why not try e takes d4? Okay, by the way, just to say a word about this, this is called the Hungarian defense, And the idea, of course, is to prevent white from playing knight to g5 before black is ready to castle. So after, let's say white played something insipid like d3. Okay, knight f6. And now knight to g5 is just completely pointless because of castles. But a lot of beginners don't know this. So a lot of players think that this trade, so let's say castles, h6, knight f7. They think that this trade is pretty good for white because he's getting rid of a rook and pawn for 2 pieces. They say it's an even trade, but we're bringing the king out a little bit. Well, you're not really, because the king can just drop back to g8 at any point. And likewise, sometimes this happens before before black castles, but it comes to the same thing. But meanwhile, look at the development. So white is undeveloped, black is well ahead. He's got 3 pieces out. He's ready to play d6 or maybe even better d5, and all of his guys come out. So unless it's an endgame and there's some lines for the rooks, or the minor pieces are all completely dominated, almost always in a middle game situation, this is a really bad deal for white, for the side that trades the 2 pieces for the rook and pawn. So don't do this if you're white. Anyway, so that was the idea going back here. Oops, too far. That's the idea of the Hungarian, the basic idea. So you don't have to worry about any of this knight to g5 business. All right, the drawback is that white seems to get this free hand in the center with d4. Okay, so e takes d4 is what we're proposing. And now white can play knight takes d4. I mean, there's certainly nothing wrong with that, and probably gets a small edge here. I mean, it's kind of like a favorable scotch, really. But there's this trappy line with c3. And the idea is that after d takes c3, queen of d5, and it looks like really bad news for black. White threatens simply to give mate on f7, a la the scholar's mate, and black has no way to prevent this without losing some material. I mean, if he plays d6, it's mate in 2 moves. Queen f7, king d7, bishop e6. Oops. So black's only way to stay alive here is with knight h6. But now white plays bishop takes h6, and hey, he's up a piece for what, 1 pawn? No, 2 pawns. But he's threatening mate. He's threatening bishop takes g7. He's threatening knight takes c3, I suppose. And this looks just awful for black. And so many players have even resigned in this position after queen of d5. But this is wrong, and it's actually quite complicated. So bishop takes h6. Now black castles. And already here, believe it or not, white needs to be careful. Okay, so white has 3 choices here. All right, we'll start with the one that's ostensibly the worst. So bishop to c1 is, at one level, the most natural move. It's also a move that's been criticized as being poor. But as we'll see, this is actually kind of an interesting move if white gets into the spirit of things here. Okay, so knight to b4 is the perhaps quote-unquote refutation of bishop to c1. So he threatens knight to c2 check, and if white plays queen of d1, if white plays queen of d1, then black plays c2, and he regains his piece. He's up a pawn, and he's basically safe and just very happy. So I don't know if he's winning, say clearly better. Certainly, though, this is nothing white really wants to see. So queen h5, however, is a little brainstorm of mine that maybe will prove quite interesting as well. So white decides that, okay, I can sacrifice material too. So let's say knight to c2 check, king to f1, maybe king to d1 is worth considering too. Knight takes a1, and now there are various things that white can try. So the most natural looking move is just knight takes c3. And white is down the exchange in a pawn, but this knight is perhaps, at the very least, it's going to take it some time for him to get out and to return to civilization. And meanwhile, white's got some very active pieces. I mean, the queen looks nice, the bishop is very good. This knight on c3 could come into d5 at some point. White may try to play knight to g5, or maybe bishop to g5, swap it off and then play knight to g5. And maybe h4 will occur too, which both has two functions. So one is the possibility of the rook maybe coming into play at some point. And the second idea is that after knight to g5, if bishop takes g5, h takes g5, and black could get tenderized on h7. So I think black is probably okay here, but it's again complicated, and I think there's more to be said. So I'll just give one quick variation. So c6. Okay, now bishop to d3. So switching gears a little bit. And here, for example, if bishop to f6, bishop to g5, threatening e5. If e5 straight away, why not just e5 right away? Well, on e5 right away, you play g6, and then the bishop drops back to g7. So bishop to g5, bishop takes, and now here's kind of a funny move. Queen takes g5, takes and takes, and hey, this knight is stuck because the bishop on d3 wasn't just pointing at h7, it's also pointing at c2. So white's fine. All right, instead though, black should play d5. Kind of paradoxical, inviting white to capture and threaten mate in the process. But after he takes d5, f5, and here maybe g3. But even this is okay. So g3, and white has some chances. The knight on a1 is still stuck. So you can see maybe king g2, and the bishop comes to g5 or to f4. And white has real play here. Okay, so let's go back. Yes, I guess I was right. Okay, this is the line where white comes close but doesn't quite have enough. So h4 instead of knight takes c3. So here, black's best is I think queen to e8, overprotecting f7, and maybe in some variations preparing to play f5. Okay, so now if knight to g5, we'll see the third point behind the move. Bishop takes g5, h takes g5, threatening mate. But now queen takes e4 messes everything up. So white can play knight takes c3, but after probably what I'm saying, just takes the bishop and then queen goes to d3. Sorry about that. Yeah, well anyway, that's why white is just in big trouble here because of that. If it wasn't check, queen takes c4 wasn't check, then maybe white could also get away with something like g6, but can't quite do it. So knight to g5 right away doesn't work, and if knight takes c3 first, c6, okay, now knight to g5, h6, and again it doesn't quite seem that white can pull off the mate. So for example, if queen to g6, this looks good, bishop takes g5, h takes g5, d5. So again, black is just in time. Here, here, and here. And this even looks interesting. Threatening h takes g7. Threatening maybe queen to g3 or queen to d4 in some lines. But certainly h takes g7 is the main threat. But after queen to d8, I think black is again okay. So this one doesn't quite work for white, though I think there are more resources. And maybe just the immediate knight takes c3 does work out all right, followed by bishop to d3. Okay, so that's one line, and there you can maybe fall into the trap. I mean, it's like trap several iterations in. So first, black falls into the trap by taking on c3, but maybe it's not really a trap. And white falls into the trap with bishop c1, but maybe that's not a trap either. Anyway, there are two other moves that need to be discussed here. So there's knight takes c3. G takes h6. Okay, so this looks pretty impressive for white. I mean, he's ahead in development. Black's king's position is exposed, and he's got more space. But that's just for the moment. Now, let's think about this more carefully. First of all, the development argument. Well, he really isn't that far ahead in development. He's got 4 pieces out. Black only has 2, but black is also castled, and he's also ready to play d6 and bishop to e6. So black is going to pretty well catch up in development pretty quickly. Okay, how about the king position issue? Well, it's a small issue, but since there aren't really any open files on the king side, and white doesn't have a dark squared bishop to threaten to take on h6 or to go on the long diagonal, that's not really such a big deal either. So black can cover up pretty well with, let's say, d6 and maybe bishop to e6, bishop f6, go back to g7, and everything is nice and tidy. Okay, how about the space advantage? Well, It's a little bit, but again, once black has played those moves that I just indicated, his bishops will be very, very active, and he'll have his fair share of the center as well. Finally, black has the bishop pair here too, and an extra pawn for that matter. So I don't think he really has anything to worry about. Now white can regain the pawn. Queen h5, d6, queen h6, bishop f6, say h4, threatening knight to g5. So we should kick, and then play h6. And here it just doesn't really seem that white has anything. So let's say castles, queen f6. And I think that if anything, it's black's attacking prospects that are the more dangerous here. And among the ideas, there's a6 and b5, trying to open up some lines there. The bishop can come to e6, knight maybe comes to e5, and if the knight's on e5, there's also the possible threat of bishop to g4. So, I mean, white's not losing, but I think black is actually better in this position. Okay. So knight takes on c3 really isn't that exciting. Now, the official refutation these days is supposed to be bishop takes g7. When I say these days, I mean this has been known for a long time. And it's not like there's a lot of active work on this variation. All right, king takes g7, knight takes c3. So again, the same basic factors. Material's even, black's king's position looks a little bit opened, but it's kind of illusory. White doesn't have any real way to generate serious threats. Black has the bishop pair and will cover up without too much difficulty. So this version is a little bit better for white than the last one because black's king is slightly misplaced on g7. He'd rather have g7 free for his bishop. But even so, after d6, queen h5, queen to e8. So this actually takes advantage of the king being on g7. Castles long, f5, say takes and takes, knight d5, bishop d8, takes, and now knight e5. And I would say this position is equal. So white's got a little bit better development at the moment because black's bishop on d8 is misplaced and it bottles in the rook on a8. But c6 is going to come soon enough, and then black starts to unravel. And in fact, he's the only guy who's got a center. He's the only one with the center pawn here. So, and he's got the bishop here as well. So, I think black has very good chances here again in the long run to gain some kind of advantage. Okay, but anyway, black is totally safe here. So I think this is actually a reasonable way to play, especially against someone who knows this this so-called trap with d4 and then c3. So probably white's best here is just simply knight takes d4. Okay, so there's another fun variation to go exploring. Okay, here's another one. Bishop to c5. And now there's this goofy move, bishop takes f7 check. So unless you know the game that I'm about to show you, you'll probably never have seen this or even consider this for even a moment. Okay, so king takes f7, knight e5, so we sack a second piece, and then queen to h5 check. Okay, well now what? If you defend the knight with your king, then you're really going to live on the edge there. I mean, that's a pretty dangerous way to play, and probably not a sound way to play either. Okay, but if you give back the piece, or give back one of the pieces, then white's got a couple of pawns for the piece, and thinks that maybe black's king is a little bit exposed, and so that might seem promising too. Now, as it turns out, black's king is actually fine. So there's a couple of very good ways to play. So one is the soulless but strong king f8, queen e5, d6, and then you just play knight f6. So black is doing fine in development. His center is sound and solid enough, and really white's compensation is completely inadequate here. All right, now the game that I'm going to show you was actually very fascinating. Black played g6, so he got into the spirit of things. If white can sacrifice two pieces, hey, he can sacrifice a piece and a rook right back. So queen takes e5. Now the best move here is queen to e7, queen h8, queen e4 check, and white's king is going to be in plenty of trouble here. His queen is going to be stuck out of play. Black will play knight f6, lock it in, and he'll just go to town here. So for example, king f1, knight f6, d3, queen d4, threatening mate, bishop b3, queen b2, bishop c5, and now d6. And white is so lost here. So it's not just the threat to take the rook, but also something like bishop to g4, queen takes rook, and then queen c1 mate. Okay, so this is just very, very bad news. But again, you kind of see the idea. So white's happy to sack a couple of pieces for the initiative. Black sacrifices even more. All right, so that would have been the fun line. d6 is what was played in this game between Blackburn had black, and I don't remember. I've seen the name of the player who had white once, but usually it's just given as anonymous. Anyway, so queen takes rook, queen h4, castles, knight f6. And here the only good move for white is queen to d8. And I've spent a lot of time analyzing this, and I'll just give one of the variations that I found. But incredibly, queen to d8 really goes a long, long way towards thwarting black's attack. So, again, I'll just give one variation. Bishop to h3. And now taking the rook would be terrible, because of queen to g4, g3, and then queen f3. So that's simple. All right, so queen takes c7 is best, king to f8, now queen takes b7, queen to g4, who needs rooks? Queen takes, king f7, queen to b7 check, king f8, and this is actually forced by both sides. So if, for example, white tries to play for a win with e5, then he loses. d5, queen b7, bishop to e7, e6, and now the only winning move for black is king g7. So we throw that piece away too. We don't need it. It's all spare parts. And now whether white plays queen f8 check or d3, it's all going to come to the same thing. White's going to have to play g3 at some point, and then queen f3 and queen g2 mate. Okay, so going back to this position, white played c3 in the game. And here Blackburn finished with style, though he didn't do it the right way, because white could have played a little bit better. So he played bishop to f5 here. All right, now the problem with this is that white can play queen takes f6 and buy his way out to just a clearly worse position. But instead he played queen takes rook, and now Blackburn finished beautifully. Knight to g4, h3, takes, and mate. And for reasons I can only guess at, this is called Blackburn's mate, this pattern. So beautiful game. Not completely sound, obviously, but still beautiful. But again, a very good analysis exercise. So in addition to this game is really being a lot of fun, and actually it's a great way to study mating patterns, because black has a lot of different ways to force mate in this position. But as a great analysis exercise, look at queen to d8. Try to bust it. I mean, when I first saw this game and I saw that queen to d8 was given as refuting black's attack, I just rebelled against this internally. I mean, there's just no way that white with no development can resist the attack of all of these black forces around the king. So I certainly managed to overturn the judgment that this refutes black's attack. I mean, I think black can at least draw, and I think I found some line where he can gain an advantage too. So it's been a while since I looked at this in depth, but it's a fascinating position. And again, I think you'll learn a great deal about mating patterns, about various tactical tricks, and the relationship between when to take material and when not to take material in return for tempi by examining this position. Okay, so let's go back all the way to 3 bishop to c4. Oops, I went too far. Okay, so again, I'm not trying to give you a repertoire, but I'm trying to instill in you some creative ideas. And a lot of them will turn out to be bad. That's fine. That's how you learn. So, I mean, just last night when I was preparing this, I thought, okay, let's try to make up some new stupid idea here. And here's one. All right, g5. Now, of course, we know that this must be a terrible move. All the books condemn ridiculous moves like this. But again, let's think about it. White, in so many openings, in the Sicilian, but now in the Philidor, in some lines of the Four Knights, in the Semi-Slav, in the so-called Nimzo English, and other places too, white tries to play g4 at the first available opportunity. So why not here? Same idea. The point's to try to kick the white knight away. And if, for example, white plays h3, well, okay, h3, we just play h6. We solidify our position. Play bishop to e7, knight goes to e7, play d6, and we'll get a pretty normal-looking sort of position. And we can just build up on the king side if white castles over there. All right. Well, what else? Okay, so again, g5 is a poor move, but white has to play very accurately and actively to bust it. So the right move, of course, is d4. But even this can be interesting. Okay, so e takes d4. And now bishop takes g5, bishop e7. And here I think white has only one move to garner a significant advantage. Bishop to f4. Okay, so not impossible to find, but not the most natural move, especially in a blitz game. Okay, so knight f6, knight takes d4, not fearing knight takes e4 here. So rook to g8. And here, white should just castle. All right, but again, a lot of players are going to be loath to make such a move. Rook g4, g3. Okay, and now here, it looks like white is certainly clearly better, maybe winning, but clearly better, let's say. But black can still kick around here, so some fun moves. So d5, there's only one way for white to gain an advantage against this, and it's bishop to b5. If he takes on d5, then I think black is actually in good shape after knight takes d5. I mean, you can see all of a sudden black's pieces are pretty active looking. Wonder if he could maybe even get away with rook takes f4 here. This might even be possible too. So takes, and now knight takes d5. I'm not sure about this, but it bears a look. Okay, but bishop to b5 busts this particular idea. Okay, another try, rook takes f4, g takes f4, knight e4. Now here the problem is that white can go over on the attack. So queen h5, knight d6, queen h7. Say you do this, then check, and white's winning this, of course. All right, finally, there's just the restrained move d6. Takes, bishop, or knight c3. Yeah, this is probably winning. I mean, he's up a pawn, essentially for nothing. But again, if you're playing this in a blitz game, you could still kick around here indefinitely. I mean, black is basically just slightly worse and happens to be a pawn down. But white's king side is a little bit goofy as well, and maybe if white isn't careful, black can get some play. So the rook can go back to g8, the bishop goes to g4 or to h3, maybe get some counterplay on the queen side too with rook to b6, and black is still in there swinging. So do I recommend this? Of course not. But this just shows the richness of the game, that you can even play g5, and even if white is very accurate, you can still have a position you can fight out, you can fight in, and if he's not, then you can maybe be perfectly okay. All right, another goofy idea of mine that I'll show that I tried before a friend of mine pointed out the refutation was actually a refutation I knew. Okay, so this is against the Scotch. So we'll leave the Italian game behind at this point and move on to other things. So there's d4. And here I was tired of all of these lines where black gets a bad pawn structure on the queen side. So, typically e takes d4, knight takes d4, and let's say knight f6, knight takes c6, b takes c6. So this structure, it's not the end of the world, but it's kind of annoying. I mean, and it gives white long-term chances. So I try to figure out, well, okay, how can I avoid having to deal with this? Is there something that I can do to avoid it? And I thought, okay, how about f5? So I was playing the Schliemann. Why not play a sort of Schliemann against the Scotch? All right. So the idea is, okay, if e takes f5, then I can play e4. All right. And this is kind of interesting. Knight e5, queen f6, or maybe queen h4, with some counterplay. All right. It's probably not great, but it's interesting. And also I can just play e takes d4 too. This isn't so horrible. All right. What else? Okay, if of course d takes e5 is just dumb because of f takes e4. Actually, that might be a bit of an overstatement. I mean, maybe knight to g. Oops, not that one. This one. Knight to g5 might be okay, but I mean, black is fine too after knight takes e5. So the critical move is knight takes e5. And so here, maybe, okay, queen h4 is what I was thinking. All right, but knight takes e5, d takes e5. Maybe you could play f takes e4, but you're probably just going to lose the pawn after, let's say, queen to d5. Okay, so queen h4 is my idea, though. And it looks actually kind of interesting. So if knight takes c6, queen takes e4 check, and then d takes c6, and hey, black has managed to recoup his material. It's a little bit worse, but it's not too bad, actually. All right, the problem is that I transposed accidentally into the worst opening in chess, namely the Latvian gambit. So we'll see. Knight, yeah, f5, knight takes e5, and knight to c6, d4, queen to h4. So it's exactly the same thing. So d4, f5, d takes e5, queen h. Oops, sorry, knight takes e5, queen to h4. And the refutation of this is knight to f3. Queen takes e4 check, bishop to e2. So fortunately, this was pointed out that we transposed into Nunn's refutation of Kostin's Latvian line before I had the chance to play it and lose in a tournament. Actually, I did play this against another master who didn't find that. This was before I realized that, and lost the game, but it wasn't because of the opening. So it was kind of back and forth. I mean, I was slightly worse maybe, and then I was slightly better. And it just came down to a time scramble in a rapid game and lost it. But, you know, against a very good player, 2300, fellow 2300. And I was okay in the opening. All right, so enough of this rot. I'll close just by presenting another kind of bit of creative license in the opening here. Again, just to show you can get away with anything. So this isn't a blitz game against an IM. I was black. He played g3. I played h5. It's if you can play this against the dragon, why not on move 1, right? Okay, so bishop to g2, h4, c4, e5. So still, it's like a dragon. Okay, now he plays b3. I played knight to c6, bishop b2, knight f6, and I'm perfectly happy for him to play and take on e5 because I think that with all the open lines on the board, and especially these weak light squares, I should have very good play here. So I wasn't too concerned about this. Okay, he played e3. I played bishop to c5. Now he played knight to e2. And here, this is a mistake, and I like how I took advantage of it. So I played h3. He played bishop to f1. And now, I remembered a game, actually, that I played, a rapid game, where I was white in a French, but I think it was a French. Anyway, I got to play h5, h6. My opponent played g6, and he hadn't castled yet. And I had a bishop on g5, and I was able to play bishop to f6. He moved his rook to g8, and then I played knight to g5, won the h-pawn, and my h-pawn ended up just costing him huge material. So for that reason, thinking about that game, I played b5. So I really like this move. And of course, that it's putting the pawn en prise makes it all the more tempting for white. So he played c takes b5. Now I played knight to b4. I'm threatening mate on d3, but that's just for the sake of gaining a tempo. The real idea is that after d4, I play bishop to b7, hitting the rook, and now I play knight to g4, with the point that after, let's say, d takes c5, I play knight takes h2, threatening mate. And also, more than the mate threat, is that this h-pawn is going to go scampering down the board here. So my opponent probably saw these ideas too, and also felt claustrophobic about this knight h2 f3 idea, and so played